Okay, so we will make a start. So, welcome everyone to our first virtual event for the Reading Agency Prevent series for this new academic year, Unlocking Secrets with the Bletchley Riddle. We will have more exciting events coming your way throughout the year, so please do keep your eyes peeled for those. The Reading Agency is a UK charity with a mission to empower everyone to read. Reading, as you'll know, is a hugely important skill. Evidence shows that it improves health and well-being, life chances, and also social connections. And the Reading Agency champions access to the proven power of reading by providing activities for people of all ages. And it does that by working with public libraries, prisons, hospitals, and other community settings too, reaching over 2 million people each year. Today is National Reading Group Day, and we are very pleased to be welcoming you all. If you get the chance, do let us know where you're watching from using the chat function. And we have a real treat in store for you this afternoon with not just one award-winning author, but two. We're delighted to be joined by Ruta Sepetys, winner of the Carnegie Medal with Salt to the Sea, and also winner of the Carnegie Medal Shadow's Choice for I Must Betray You. Ruta is a hugely inspiring speaker. She carries out fascinating research on each of her books, and as well as writing fiction, has also written a book about the way our own experiences and memories can help to shape stories. Additionally, we're massively excited to welcome Steve Sheinkin. Steve is an award-winning author of non-fiction books, including Bomb, The Race to Build and Steal the World's Most Dangerous Weapon, which was a finalist for the National Book Awards and won the Sibert Medal. Steve has also written the Rabbi Harvey graphic novel series and the Time Twister series. And together, Ruta and Steve have collaborated on a fascinating, twisting thriller adventure story, The Bletchley Riddle, which is set in the 1940s around the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. What's doubly exciting about this is that you're some of the first people to get a sneak peek of the story, because it actually doesn't publish in the UK until the 8th of October. There will be a chance for question and answers at the end of the session, so please put any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we'll answer as many of those as possible at the end. Without further ado, I'll now hand over to Ruta and Steve. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. What a great intro. And Jake is right. This is the first time we've ever presented to a school, right, Ruta?
It is. It is.
Wow.
This is our maiden voyage, which is so exciting. We're so grateful to be here with all of you, and we're hoping to share a bit about the book, a bit about our journey to becoming writers. Steve's going to share some secret code breaking activities, and we'd love to hear from you as well in the chat.
All right, I'm going to just kick things off by showing a quick trailer that we made for the book, and then we'll jump into our discussion right after that. Here we go.
What is this place?
Used to be a rich family's country home, absurdly large and showy. Kind of like a very polite haunted house. Stop asking questions.
Why?
Lizzie, what'd I just say?
We don't need to see that again.
So, the Bletchley Riddle. The Bletchley Riddle is a super exciting mystery adventure set at the secret code-breaking factory of Bletchley Park. And the setting is 1940 during the Battle of Britain. And the story follows two siblings, Jakob and Lizzie Novus. And they're the children of a British father and an American mother. And these two characters are recruited to work at this secret code-breaking factory. And invasion is imminent. Hitler is about to invade, and these two siblings are racing to unravel the riddles and crack the codes before Hitler invades England. So it's history, it's mystery. Imagine Enola Holmes meets World War II, and that's kind of the vibe of the Bletchley Riddle. So Steve, tell us a little bit about the characters.
Yeah, well, they are siblings, as you said, and I'm going to steal a Ruta line because I've heard you say this. Uh, Jakob, the character that I wrote, and we'll get a little more into how we collaborated, is a codebreaker, and he is recruited. He's a young mathematics student and is recruited into this secret world. And Lizzie, his sister, is a rule breaker. So she's also winds up in this world, though not, as we see early in the story, according to plan. And so they're very different. Yes, they love each other, but they've been apart for years, and they really have to kind of readjust. That's kind of a fun part of the story for us as people with multiple siblings ourselves, and live together in this tiny room. I don't know if any of you guys have ever shared a little tiny room. I used to have a bunk bed with a brother, and so that dynamic is part of this story too. They're in this incredibly high stakes situation of trying to crack codes and win the war and solve these mysteries, but they're also a brother and sister trying to get along. And I wrote the brother Jakob, and Ruta wrote the sister Lizzie, and we wrote very short chapters kind of throwing the story back to one another. I don't know if any of you have tried this, but I actually recommend it highly, and I hadn't tried it, so I can talk from experience. Yeah, pick a friend or someone to collaborate with, and just kind of pick a story to do. Don't even plan it all out. Just kind of start writing and write little pieces and throw the story back. I mean, didn't you find, Ruta, that sometimes you were surprised by what I wrote, and because I know I was by what you did, and then I was scrambling to push the story forward again.
Oh, I was super surprised. And also, I was challenged in a great way. I mean, this is Steve Sheinkin, like the master, like 3-time National Book Award finalist. The stakes were pretty high for me as a writer, but I found that, wow, what can happen when energies are combined, when you collaborate? It's much more exciting than just, for me, it was than just working on my own and writing on my own. So I love that process. And Steve, they're probably wondering, how did we even become writers? What was our journey to our path to becoming a writer? So I'll start a little bit, I guess. I've written 6 novels. As Jake said, one of my novels has been adapted into a graphic novel. And I've also written a nonfiction book called You, the Story, that helps readers archive and mine their own stories for creative projects and to write about them. And I've always been a storyteller, but I haven't always been an author. Before becoming a writer, I was first and foremost a reader. And the books I loved as a kid, mystery. I loved mystery and adventure stories. And I know Steve did too, right? You did. You loved mystery.
Totally.
Absolutely. Yeah. We both loved mystery and adventure. I particularly loved a character, Nancy Drew. And so while other kids were asking for clothes or music for their birthday, me, no. I wanted a magnifying glass and a metal detector. That was all. I was going to go on the hunt. I was going to uncover and discover. And I wrote my first novels, my first 2 novels, when I was in 3rd grade. And here we're showing pictures of my novels. They were called The Adventures of Betsy and Betsy's Double Trouble Days. And I was so excited about my first foray into becoming an author. And I shared these 2 books with my class. And my friend took the book home, and her mom called my mom and said, "Have you read The Adventures of Betsy?" My mom said no. She said, "Well, I think you should. There's something seriously wrong with your daughter." Click. And she hung up the phone. And it became a bit of a drama. And I tell you this because I wanted to be an author from the age in the picture that is shown here. But this drama where parents were questioning what I was writing about, it stole my courage. And I didn't write again for 20 years. So instead, after college, I majored in finance, not in literature, not in history. I was a finance major. And I decided to pursue storytelling through music. So after finishing university, I moved to Hollywood. And for 22 years, I helped Songwriters and artists and musicians and rock bands tell stories through music. I mean, a song is a 3-minute story, right? A video game is a story. You're playing through a story. If any of you are gamers, you're wondering, what did I work on? I worked on 2 Halo games, like half a dozen Ratchet and Clank games, and I still work with a film composer who composes for the game called Hitman through IO Interactive. So I was working in storytelling and music, and I realized that when the musicians put a piece of their own story into the song, it was much more likely to become successful. And that's because there was an element of emotional truth to it. So I got in the habit of asking these musicians, hey, what's your story? What's your story? And then one day, the musician who's pictured up in the top, with me holding the gold records, he turned to me and he said, Ruta, for 20 years, you've been asking all of us, what's our story? And he said, we want to know, what's your story? Have you ever thought about telling your own story? And that day, it changed my life. I actually started writing, and I wrote what became my first book, Between Shades of Gray. And I ended up leaving Los Angeles once I started writing, and I moved to Nashville, and that's where I live now. And when I moved to Nashville, I decided that I wanted to be surrounded by my greatest inspiration. And my greatest inspiration, it's not another writer, it's not a book, it's nature. So my husband and I decided that we were going to be adventurous, and that when we came to Tennessee, we were going to live in a treehouse. So we started building the treehouse, and here you can see the building that's going on, and we live up in the trees. And I was explaining this morning when I signed on, I'm looking out the windows, there are threats of tornadoes today. And so I'm looking for these funnel clouds descending because I'm going to have to evacuate the treehouse. But anyway, when we were building this treehouse, it was wildly inspiring, but for many reasons. One day, the builder came to us and said, Ruta, I think you need to come down. We've discovered something. And the builder took me down, and I looked at the ground and I said, oh, there's a bunch of trash. Was this a trash? Because we live on a hill. Was this a trash dump? He said, oh no, Ruta, this isn't a trash dump. There was an entire world beneath the ground. The property that we had purchased was sitting on top of a secret enterprise. You might wonder, well, what was it? Well, we're in Tennessee. It was an illegal whiskey enterprise that for many, many moons had been, and we don't know, was it covered up? Was there, a dirt slide, or did they cover it up to hide it from someone? But what happens is now when we have rains, things begin to come up from the earth. It's really super magical. And you can see here some of the things coming up from the earth. So that's where I live and work now. And you wonder, oh, is the treehouse ever finished? Yes, you can see where I am now. I think I have a picture of my office, Steve, if you want to show my. So this is a finished treehouse, and this is where I'm talking to you from today, except like I say, there might be a tornado any minute. So I'm in Nashville and Steve is in New York. Steve, tell us a little bit about your path to becoming a writer and where you write and work.
Yeah, it's different, but the same in the sense that it was meandering a little bit to find my way. I think anyone I've ever met who makes a living in the arts has some version of that story. So here I am with my brother. I like to show this because this is not just because of the hair. I do like to brag about our hair, but you can tell which one's me, right? It's the curls versus the bowl. It looks like he has a Lego piece on his head, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And this is when we decided to be writers. I think I was 12 or 13 and he was 10. And we started writing movies together. And that was our whole dream. It had nothing to do with books and certainly nothing to do with school. But we wanted to be filmmakers. So I'll skip through time quickly. This was in New York. We moved to Austin, Texas. Here we are. You can still see my hair is going strong. And we started making low budget movies. We made this independent feature film that we were positive was going to make us rich and famous. And it didn't work out as planned. If you don't believe me, I'll show you the first review this book, or movie rather, called A More Perfect Union got. And I don't know if you can see my little arrow around here, but look at the very bottom of the screen. You see the one sad and lonely star on the bottom. I won't read the review to you. I'm going to move this slide really fast so you can't read it because it's very embarrassing. Of course, you've heard of something called the internet. You can find this. But all right, so you put something out there. I mean, everyone has had this experience. There's always going to be someone ready to say something negative and obnoxious about it. That's okay. You have to be able to get past that. So I still really wanted to be a writer. I tried a lot of different things, writing stories and movies, and eventually landed on writing nonfiction books. What I love about true stories is that sometimes if you find the right one, it's even better to not make anything up. Sometimes it's more exciting to know that a story is totally true. And the truth is, when your age, I thought history was boring because I thought it was just about memorizing names and dates. And sometimes you have to do that for a test, but that is kind of boring, let's be honest. So I like to turn my research into stories, which is exactly what Ruta and I have tried to do with the Bletchley Riddle. Here's where I work. It's not a tree house, but it's kind of cool in its own way. And it has a secret kind of past as well. So you see, this is the building that I have an office in, and it used to be a bank. I think you can read that there, Saratoga National Bank. And now it has stores and offices. If you go down this hallway, which looks like it was last renovated in the 1950s, you'll come to that. This is right outside my office. This is what I wanted to show. So it's a vault. It must be 10 feet high. That's my sixth grader, who's now in college, by the way. But of course, if you walk past that, wouldn't you break in? I mean, wouldn't you try? But if you look really closely, it's welded shut. And the reason they say in the building is that, oh yeah, it's very dangerous. The last time it was opened, it slammed shut on somebody's arm. So I don't know if that's true. I don't know if the arm is still in there. I don't know if gold bullion is in there. I don't know, but it's exciting to walk past it every day. And then I get to my office, which is much more normal looking. This is the board that I look at. Literally, I'm looking at right now above my computer. And if I put all my research about Bletchley, and you can see a map of London and then a map of the towns around Bletchley and Buckinghamshire and pictures and calendars and all these things. I just love, and you probably have similar things in class and school. I love building this sort of stuff when I'm writing a story. So we're going to jump into now the setting of the story. This secret code breaking place really was called Station X. Isn't that amazing? Again, you couldn't make that up. So why change it?
Right. Initially, Bletchley Park, it was called Station X. So now let's drop you into the story and the setting. So imagine it's 1940. The Battle of Britain rages. And keep in mind, during the Battle of Britain, England stood alone against Hitler. The United States was not in the war. Churchill wanted the US to get into the war, but we weren't. England stood alone against Hitler, and invasion was imminent. And so in England, there were evacuations. School kids were evacuated to the countryside. And in London, the city was basically unrecognizable. There were these barrage balloons, which are like these fish-sized blimps that you see in the picture. They were suspended from these metal wires to detract and to deter enemy aircraft from coming too close to the city. All along the sidewalks, there were air raid shelters and, surrounded by sandbags. So if the air raid siren went off, people could run into the shelter. And then there were posters posted everywhere, warning people, there are spies everywhere. Trust no one. Tell no one. Someone could be listening. Thousands of lives were lost in the last war because valuable information was given away. So be on your guard. So there was this sense of fear and hypervigilance, and everyone was looking to the sky. And that's the setting. And now let Steve take it from here.
Yeah, that's exactly the setting where our story begins. And this is, again, real. My character, Jakob, is a fictional character, but he, like many people, really did get a telegram that said this exact thing. I hope it's legible on your screens. Anti-flow is not so well. That's a strange little cryptic sort of statement, but they knew, people who had been recruited into this secret world knew what it meant. It meant they were to get on a train and report to Station X. And think about it. I mean, actually, I would love to throw it to you. Can you think of a story or a series of books that begins with somebody, a young person, being taken away to some mysterious world, to some strange school where they have to learn something new. I mean, isn't that something that you've read about? I'm not looking at the chat right now, but I'm sure you could put some examples in there of times when this happened. And I think it was partly inspired by times when it happened in real life. And that's exactly what happens to our characters in this story. You get on a train in London, and just like Harry Potter did, and you show up somewhere else. And in this case, it's this little station. Can you see the sign? Can anyone see the sign? It's, oh yeah, Ruta Sepetys really does have, I'll give you a hint. It's right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's Bletchley. This is the station of Bletchley. It's not nearly as romantic looking. You can still take a train there. We did it, but it doesn't look so cinematic. It's kind of modernized now. And then you would make your way to this mansion. And it really was a rich family's mansion that was taken over by the government, the Secret Service part of the government, to work as a code-breaking factory, a place away from London. In case, like Ruta said, they were bombed, they wanted all these code breakers to be safe and out of the way. So imagine showing up there, you go into the mansion, you look around, it feels like you've walked onto the set of a movie. There are these workspaces everywhere that look kind of normal, and yet at the same time, everything is so secretive. In fact, so far as you've shown up there, imagine this, they haven't told you what you're there to do yet. You still don't know. You know it has something to do with the war and something to do with the fact that you're good at mathematics, or you're a good chess player, or you're good at solving crosswords, but you don't know what it is.
So yeah, so just to recap, let's say you are one of these people who is either good at math, good at solving puzzles, you're maybe a musician. There were people who were magicians even, and they received these telegrams. Anti-flow is not so well. And they knew what that meant. They had been told in advance when they were recruited. That meant report to station X. So they get on the train, and they don't know where they're going. They just know which train they're supposed to get on, and they go. And they wind up at Bletchley Park, and they see this mansion. And when Steve and I were researching the story, we were reading accounts of people who were recruited, and they described it that when they arrived and they saw the mansion, it was a maudlin monstrosity or a provincial pile. So I didn't know what to expect. This mansion is so incredible. Oh my goodness. The stairs creak and speak, and the windows rattle on the wind. It was incredible. But so these people arrived at this undisclosed location. But before they do anything, they're taken to an office and they're instructed to sign what's known as the Official Secrets Act. They have to swear an oath to the king at that time, that they would not reveal what they're doing, where they are, anything about their work to people on the outside, and even to some extent to people on the inside. So this was the Official Secrets Act. And they were supposed to swear, I hereby promise that no word of mine shall betray, however slightly, the great trust placed in me. And I want to ask you guys, and I'm hoping that you will chime in, classrooms, on the chat. So you are one of these people. You get a telegram, anti-flow is not so well, report to station X. You don't know where you're going to live. You don't know what kind of work you'll be doing. And you don't know how long you will be there. And you cannot breathe a word of it to anyone. And Steve, anyone, right? I mean, we're talking.
Yeah, and people would question that and say, yeah, of course, but I have to explain to my parents where I am, right? They know I'm not fighting on the front lines. How do you explain that? And no, you can't. Parents, if you're married, spouses, children, no, not anyone at all, ever. Not just now, but ever.
Ever. And not just, oh, well, once the war will be over, then you can spill the secret. No, you will swear. And these people, thousands of people, they signed the Official Secrets Act. In some countries, they still have these Official Secrets Acts in 40 countries. But we want to know from you. I mean, me personally, like Steve said, his character, Jacob, was a code breaker. Mine was a rule breaker. I am not a secret keeper. I would have a really hard time with this. But if they said, this is in service for the war, can't tell you anything, but sign this paper, would you do it? I want to know. So maybe some of you can chime in the chat. Would classrooms, could you keep a secret? Do you think this would work today?
That's a really interesting question, everybody. Shares so much information all the time. I don't know. I
Yeah.
kind of like keeping secrets myself, so I might.
I would tell you,
be able-
sure,
I
you're a
might.
good secret keeper.
But let's we want to move on and keep telling this story. So while you're thinking of that, or maybe even in your mind signing this Secrets Act, I'm going to pretend that you did, just for the sake of our
Okay.
story. And then I'm going to introduce you to your enemy. This is what you're here for. Imagine you've shown up here. This is what you're here for, is to work on the machine in this box, which looks pretty innocent so far, right? And you open it up and it looks kind of like a typewriter. This is the Enigma Machine, and it was a German cipher machine. Basically, you would type in a message, in this case, usually in German, but you could use any language that uses this alphabet. You would type it in, and as you type one letter, another letter, a different letter shows up on the keyboard above. These little light, they call it a light board above, that is the cipher of that letter. So it just changes one letter into another. And inside there are all these rotors and where wires carry electricity that are essentially just changing one letter to another. And it's going through several rotors and bouncing back and then going through what they call the plug board on the front of it. There are lots of great videos on YouTube that'll break this down and show you how it all works. But really the key to it, this is what a message would look like. So it would look like gibberish. It would come through as a series of random looking letters. How would you begin to decipher that? I mean, that's a big part of the story that we tell in the Bletchley Riddle. Imagine, all right, so you're going to send a message, Ruta. Say, so meet me today in Paddington Station. Something very, very simple.
Okay, that's my message. That's my message.
Type this in. Yeah, I wanted to tell you this. I would type it in to an Enigma machine, and these letters would light up, and it would turn into that gibberish. And if you had an Enigma machine, you could set yours up in this exact same way and type in the gibberish, and meet me today would show up on the lights.
And was this machine created specifically for the war? I mean, to do this with these messages?
Not at all. No, it was just created as a business machine at first. And then the army realized, the German army realized, hey, we can use this to send our messages, because they were doing it all by Morse code sent over the radio. And as you probably know, when you send something over the radio, anyone can pick up those waves. So even just this is a really interesting code breaking trick. I encourage everybody to do this. You can take a message and break it up into those groups of 5, like the Enigma operators did, and it looks like gibberish. Can anyone read this?
Ooh.
Take a chance at write it down, or do it in your head. See if you can.
So this is a way of creating a code, right, Steve? Like you can
really
divide the words.
Doesn't it look? Your eye tricks you. You look at that and say, "Okay, that's a code. I have no idea what that says." And then if you just look at it a little more carefully, you can see that it's just regular English, but broken up into these groups of 5. So that's one trick you can do, and see if you can fool your friends with. I think it's really fun. This is the number that's really important, and this is what you would have been introduced to when you met Enigma for the first time. This is how many different ways you can set up the machine. And unless you know how the machine is set up, you'll never be able to decipher the message. So that's a rather long, I don't know, those are way beyond billions and trillions. And Google's, I think, is the next. I don't know what this is exactly. If you tried one, here's a caution though. If you tried one setting just to try to brute force it, as code breakers say, if you tried one setting every minute, it would take longer than the age of the universe to get the right answer. So that's not going to work. And that's where the code breakers were challenged. They had this incredible challenge of breaking this code that the Germans were convinced was unbreakable. And it was
I
very
love
close
this
to being
picture.
unbreakable.
Steve, I love this picture. There's so much to notice in this picture. First, look at the blackout drapes on the windows. So during the war, it was essential to extinguish all light at night, so the enemy bombers couldn't see anything from above to know to bomb. So you see the blackout drapes. But I noticed something else in this picture that I wonder if the classes notice as well. These code breakers, they're all women. Right? Steve, were there a lot of women?
There were a lot of women, and that increased as the war went on. And our story takes place in a very short period of time in the summer of 1940 during the Battle of Britain. But of course, World War II, as you know, went on until 1945, and Bletchley got bigger and bigger and hired and brought in more and more people. And by the end of the war, it was 75% women. And they just didn't care. They just wanted people who were good at puzzles or good at languages, or librarians. Librarians were very important because remember, this is before computers, and they had to catalog all this information, millions of pieces of information that they were deciphering. And so, yes, the staff is mostly women at Bletchley. So, all right. I'm keeping an eye on time. I don't know. I want to make sure we have lots of time for Q&A. And we want to do a bit of a code breaking lesson too. I think we should skip to that because we're going to talk about our research. Maybe we could come back to this in more detail when we do Q&A, but this very quickly, I mean, it was very important to us to go to Bletchley. Maybe some of you guys have been there already. We saw a lot of school groups there when we were there, right?
We did. It was an incredible experience to go. Steve and I took the train. We went to England. We scouted locations in London of where Jakob and Lizzie would have lived in London. And then we went out to Bletchley Park. We can show it quickly. So we went out to Bletchley Park and we met with the official research historian. Bletchley Park has an official research historian who worked with us, who read our drafts. We went there. He came on the train and met with us. We toured through Bletchley for several days, and I saw this on a door, and this inspired partially me to create the character of Lizzie. All of the messengers there at Bletchley Park were girls, and some were as young as 14. And imagine, they were seeing all aspects of the park, and so that was very, very inspiring going through all of Bletchley. Oh, and here's Steve researching. Steve is very much a visual researcher, right?
Absolutely. And there really was, hopefully you'll read the story and you'll see that there is a family that lives inside of the grounds of Bletchley. They have nothing to do with code breaking. They were caretakers, and they have a boy who's 12 years old who lives there, which seems impossible. Wouldn't they have kicked the kid out of Bletchley? No, he lived there during the war. So of course we included that, and he lived in this courtyard here. And what I do want you to notice, this is the real reason I put this in. I'm just standing there taking it all in. Meanwhile, here's what Ruta is doing.
Oh, no, unfair. You're not supposed to show that.
Oh, sorry. No. No, look, but this is research. This is like, oh, wow. She's like a detective. Research really is like detective work, isn't it?
It is. Next slide, my friend.
We won't show Bletchley Park that you were doing. She didn't actually break that lock off, though. Maybe.
Don't tell anyone.
Actually, I don't know that she didn't. I don't know.
Don't tell anyone.
But yeah, we saw lots of cool little documents everywhere that we turned. This was an amazing thing. You spotted this first, I think. This thing from J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Hobbit. If you look at that,
we saw some recruiting logs as we were going through Bletchley and working with the research historian. He was sharing about the process of people being interviewed to become code breakers, and on one of the lists was Professor Tolkien. And we asked the research historian, he said, oh yes, that was the writer, of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. And we looked on this, and if you look very closely, I better get my magnifying glass out. Next to Tolkien's name, it says K-E-E-N. And we didn't know, okay, is he keen to become a code breaker? Or is that the pronunciation of his name? Was that the recruiter's note? But just to see, and there were so many people like this, so many very famous people who were at Bletchley Park, but could never speak of it because they had signed the Official Secrets Act.
Yeah, and just going through these this is fantastic. So this is also part of the detective work. This picture I had up on my computer 24 hours a day for a year. You can see everything in Bletchley. There's a pond there. There's all these trees, but this is the thing that fascinated me. Here's the mansion and the little beginnings of the town here. But look at this hedge maze. There was a maze made out of hedges. I mean, that sounds like something out of a great old novel, but it's true. And here's a closer view of it. So of course we had to work. You could probably even solve it. If I left this slide up, you could kind of go in here and figure out, oh no, I think you go in here. But yeah, so of course we had to work that into the story. We worked this into the story too. This is the inn where Jakob and Lizzie lived.
Yep.
Amazing. I mean, if you knew that there was an inn that looked like that was called the Shoulder of Mutton, I mean, wouldn't you have to put that into the story? And that's something you'll find, and I hope you'll do when you work on projects, is you'll find stuff in your research that you just said, oh, I've gotta use that.
Oh, and the next one was definitely something that we found that we thought, this is just too great.
It's too great. I'm sure hopefully you've heard of Alan Turing, one of the great geniuses in mathematics in the early days of computer science. Maybe you're lucky enough to have a 50-pound note with Alan I have one right. Yeah, I have one over there on my board, of course. And the silver bar. This would be a big spoiler to go into. I'm not going to explain too much about this story because we use it as a big part of our story. But it's true that Turing was this brilliant codebreaker who also did some very quirky things. He was very worried he was worried the Germans would invade like everybody was. And he put all his money into silver bars that looked like that, which, as you can see, were 29, 30 kilograms, so over 60 pounds. And put them in a baby pram and carried them out into the woods and buried them.
He buried his life savings. He cashed it into silver bars, silver ingots, put them in a pram, and took them outside of Bletchley Park, and he buried them. And at the end of the war, can I tell, Steve? I am not a secret keeper. Can I tell?
I know. I don't want to, but I know you're going. Yeah, I guess you could.
Let me just say, okay, all I'll say is that the silver's still there and no one has ever found it. And so we have woven an element of that with some clues into the Bletchley Riddle. We want you to find the silver.
Yeah, enough said about that. Yeah, hopefully you will, or hopefully I will. Honestly, I want to find it.
Yes.
So yeah, imagine you're in this government code and cipher school. That's really what it was called. They were recruited into this cipher school. And so I want to teach you guys a code. I know it seems like that Enigma code is so complicated, but these guys broke it. And this was even before computers. But I could teach you a code. We're going to teach you one right now that no computer can break. That sounds impossible, doesn't it? In this day and age.
Impossible. Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll hear code and cipher. They're really technically a little bit different. Ciphers are really simpler. They're just swapping one letter for another. So this is a classic cipher and you could do this. You and a friend can do this. Take a piece of paper, make that little table like that. See, the regular alphabet is on top, just A, B, C, D through, and then just randomly put in letters on the bottom, and that's a cipher alphabet. And if Ruta and you and I have this little sheet of paper, memorize it if you can, but most people can't do that. Just don't show it to anybody, and then write out. When I want to write an I write a B. When I want to write an O, I write a P. And if I write out a whole message like that, it's going to look like gibberish and no one can solve it, hopefully. So that's a really simple cipher that's over 2,000 years old, this idea. And here's another really old idea, the book code. This one I'm going to teach you to do because it is unbreakable and it seems like it shouldn't be, but it is. So this is an old-fashioned letter from the American Revolution where two spies were talking and they were writing some words, but also some groups of letters. Can you see these letters? I'll zoom in on them.
Numbers, yeah.
Numbers, I'm sorry, of course. There's some letters and some numbers. So 67, 8, 28, it looks like. And that's the book code. They were using a book code, which we're going to explain really quickly right now. It works with, and if you have a piece of paper, take notes on this because it's very simple. You're going to get it right away. So
and it's unbreakable.
That's the thing. And I'll explain why in a minute. But all right, so it's all it is 3 numbers. So 124, 17, 7 is just an example. 124 is the page number of a book. Ruta and I are going to say we wanted to communicate with a book code. Oh, you both happen to have the same book. What a surprise. This is actually an advanced copy of our book full of typos and stuff. But so say we have the same book. Here's what makes it unbreakable. No one can know what book we're using. That's what makes it unbreakable. So this would probably not be good because people would guess that we would use it. But all right, say we're using the same book. 124 is the page number. There it is. 17 is the line number. So count down from the top. And then 7 is the word number, count over. So I'll give you an example. So 124, if I write 124, 17, 7, Ruta would know to turn to page 124 of our secret book, count down to line 17, very simple, count over to word 7, and that is London. So that group of seemingly meaningless numbers means London. And there's no way a computer could figure that out because there's no basis to even begin to guess unless you know what book people are using. So this is the part if you wanted to write something down in terms of how to do it with your friends. All you need to know is 3 numbers, the page number, the line number on that page, and then the word number on that line. So say, Ruta, like I sent Ruta this
Okay.
little scrap of paper in the middle of the night, with these 3 groups of numbers. There's no computer in the world that could decipher it. The only way anyone could possibly know what that means is if they knew which book it came from. And if you did know, so you put it on a board like this and you just look up page 98, line 5, count over to 8. You could do this in our book. And this is my message to Ruta. Because I think she really found that, maybe she found that silver and I want it back.
I'm not going to tell.
Yeah. So hopefully you'll try this. Try this today and challenge anyone to break this code as long as you don't tell anybody which book you're using. And it, of course, has to be the same exact edition because you know how books can have different illustrations, but so it has to be exactly the same, that has the same text on each page. But that's pretty easy to find. Oh, this is the copy. This you guys may see this before we do. This is the cover of our UK edition, right?
Yeah, it's the cover of our UK edition, and the book comes out in the United States on October 8th, and in the UK on October 10th. So we hope that you enjoyed that brief introduction to the Bletchley Riddle, and there's just so much more. It truly is just such an incredible story. And as Steve said, so many stories start where someone is whisked away to some mysterious place or some mysterious school. But this was real. It really happened. And thousands of people kept it a secret until the 1970s, when someone actually broke the act and wrote a book about it. So we're hoping now that maybe some of you have some questions that Jake can help moderate.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge thank you for that brilliant introduction to the Bletchley Riddle, the way you've collaborated, and also, yeah, your pathways to becoming writers from readers. That was really, really fascinating. With the Secrets Act that you were talking about, Wisdom St. Hugh's and Abermordu were mostly yes, they felt that they could. St. Paul's were 2/3 no. Some children said that they could keep the Secrets Act, but the adults with them really disagreed. So I think we've got a mix of code breakers and rule breakers here with us this afternoon. We've also got some schools from Manchester who really connected with the idea of Alan Turing. So that was great to hear too. So our first question to you is, do you think you would have been a better spy or code breaker?
Wow, better spy. What do you think, Ruta?
I think this is a brilliant question. Thank you for this question. I would say actually that Steve would be, I'm going to say what I think. You're a brilliant codebreaker, and you would be a brilliant codebreaker. But being a spy, you're such a wonderfully honest and straightforward person. But maybe that's what would make you a good spy, is that I would never suspect you. So you could be both. I think you could. What do you think, Steve?
I think I'd be a better spy because I would want to be a better code breaker. This is the honest answer. Because I really admire that skill in mathematics and logical thinking, but I'm just good at that. I'm not great at it. So would I have been recruited? Like people, and this happened to Jacob in our story. He's sitting in his, in his essentially his room is in Cambridge. He went to Cambridge as a teenager, and someone came in and recruited him to this secret world. That would not have happened. No one would have knocked on my door in the middle of the night. But a spy, you're right, because people think, I like to think I'm a pretty honest guy, but that's actually good. Having that, being able to make people think that, even if it's genuine, that's a really good quality in this. You don't want to be like James Bond. I mean, you may want to look like that and have all the cool suits and gadgets, but everybody notices James Bond when he walks into a room.
And
that's actually not good for spying.
No, and I could be neither. I couldn't be a spy because I can't keep a secret, and I have to tell everyone everything. And I definitely could not be a code breaker. And I say this because I want the students watching to know that the book, I don't want to give any spoilers, but there are lots of riddles and codes to break. And that is not my forte at all. But in writing the book and reading our drafts, I learned how to do this, and you can too. And I am not a mathematician.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you. Our next question is how you found sort of collaborating together to write the book, and how did that compare to sort of working individually?
Well,
it
was so different. We learned pretty early on that our processes are different. Writers have their own processes, and you've probably heard this term that writers are either plotters or pantsers, meaning they create a detailed plot or they fly by the seat of their pants. And Steve, I found, was a plotter. He likes to have an outline of what's happening. And for me, when I write historicals, history provides my outline. And so I'm a pantser. So Steve, why don't you tell them how that worked and how we ended up bridging those widths between us?
I feel like we did some of both. And then that was a good thing. And maybe we both got a little bit out of our comfort zone. And that's something that's probably pretty good. It's worth doing that. So we kind of outlined, we did a lot of it on Zoom, even during the pandemic. A lot of this was written on Zoom, or at least planned out that way. We would have these calls that looked just like what we're doing now, and we would plan out the next 3 or 4 things that would happen. And so I didn't have the big outline. I'm looking up at my board because I usually put these big outlines up on my board. We didn't really have that, but we had enough so that then we could go to our own little rooms, which you saw, and write our chapters. And what I think happened, which I think was a wonderful thing, was that we became almost like Jacob and Lizzie, these kind of quarreling siblings where we would disagree about things, but try to work it out with our parts of the story. And I think that kind of, we ended up challenging each other in that way.
It was a challenge because I found that I have a propensity to kill characters. And I was constantly trying to kill characters. And Steve was saying, what's wrong with you? No, this character's not good. I was like, oh, this is such a lovely character. Too bad they have to die. He's like, they're not going to die, Ruta.
True, that is true.
Brilliant, thank you. Witham St. Hugh's are really interested in the buried silver, and they'd like to know how you know that it is still actually buried.
This was a story that came from Turing and his friends. He apparently made a enciphered map or series of directions about where to find it, and then either couldn't read it or it got damaged. It couldn't figure out what, this guy could break any code you could ever imagine, but couldn't read his own instructions to where he'd buried it. So he did go back. Rudy, you found an article about him going back after the war and searching for this.
And he made his
discovered.
own metal detector. This
Yeah.
is, I mean, how brilliant Alan Turing, was. He made his own metal detector because he thought, well, I can't break my own cipher, so I'm going to use a metal detector. And he thought that he may have found, I'm not going to say where, because I'm not sure that this is public information, that where he may have found, but he couldn't get to at that time, right after the war. So this was probably what, between 45 and 50 or something, that he couldn't access the silver. So how do we know it's not found? If he couldn't access it, I'm just really I'm curious. We'll see. Again, we don't want to give any spoilers because it does relate to the story in the book. But for those of you, we call it geocaching here in the States, who love that kind of mystery adventure. Steve and I are going to be setting up a similar kind of treasure hunt in honor of Alan Turing. So stay tuned for that.
Brilliant. So we've got a couple of questions about Bletchley Park itself, and I'm going to tie those together. So why did you pick Bletchley Park? And then the second part of that is, if you could, would you go back in time and spend a day at Bletchley Park?
Wow, that's a really good one. I haven't heard that question before, but picking Bletchley, it actually happened very naturally. We had decided to maybe collaborate on something before we had an idea. And so we both, as writers, have these notebooks lying around everywhere with lots of ideas, mostly half-baked and bad in them. But I still encourage everyone. I don't know if any of you guys use old-fashioned notebooks. I meet a lot of kids who do. I mean, of course, you could take notes on your phone too, but use a notebook. It's great for that, because then you'll go through and you'll find these ideas. And this was just one of the things that was just kind of sitting around. Maybe one day I'd love to write a story about code breaking and this seemingly magical place of Bletchley Park. We agreed.
Steve brought it up to me. And those who are might be familiar with some of my books. I'm very interested in underrepresented history and hidden history. And I had known of Bletchley Park, and I had, of course, known of the brilliant Alan Turing and Gordon Welchman, Dilly Knox, these characters associated with Bletchley Park. But then Steve mentioned an aspect of the history that we have not yet spoken about because we don't want to give a spoiler. That is truly hidden history, that is unknown, related to code-breaking efforts. And I said, wait a minute, back up. Are you telling me that this is what happened? And he said, yes. And so there is an element of such hidden history that has not been featured in the movies or in some of the books on Bletchley Park. And for me, that was really the draw of, oh yes, I want to write about this. Yeah.
So what about going there? Would you, I mean, of course, it seems like a no-brainer, but you would have to sign the Secrets Act if you went.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. But yes, I would. However, let's just say that I would not be recruited as a code breaker, but maybe as a messenger like Lizzie, running from hut to hut and delivering messages. And that seems quite exciting because keep in mind, the messengers, they saw everything. The people working in the huts only saw what they were doing. And remember, they signed the Secrets Act, so they couldn't talk about it. But as a messenger, I would get to see everything. So thank you for that question. I love it.
Yeah, that would be quite difficult work. Just before you sign up, we should tell you one other detail. They work 24 hours a day on code breaking. So if you showed up there, you would get an 8-hour shift. For instance, my character, Jakob, when the story begins, he works from midnight to 8 a.m. every day. And so that's a long time to be running from one hut to another, but that's going to be your job if you agree to it.
Brilliant. Our next question is about libraries, and we've got a school who say how lucky they are to have a really good school library. They're wondering what the first book that you remember getting from the library was.
Oh, I'm sure I've got it. I have two, actually. Charlotte's Web was one of my first, and it's still protected in the plastic. James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. Those two books were, and mind you, I went to the library and I read, as a young reader, when I showed you the picture, I was reading, picture books by myself, but really where I was taking out these books and taking them home again and again. Steve, what about you?
some of the same books, but I'm going to go back to, remember how I said I didn't think I liked history as a kid? When you asked that, the thing that my mind went to history books, but they weren't the kind of history books we got in school. This is one of them, and you can tell it's well loved. It's called True Tales of Buried Treasure. Now, this is the kind of book I could read 100 times. And you can tell just from some of the themes and ideas in our story that we worked them into our novel. It's not a coincidence. There's nothing special about the inside of the book. It looks very normal, but it is exactly what it says. True tales of buried treasures that are still, this is what gets me, they're still out there. They're still
In my
out
yard.
there somewhere. They could be in your yard. They could be in my yard. I too had a metal detector. I have one right now as a grown-up kid. And yeah, because you never know, they're still out there. And that's so exciting to me.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great sort of to hear that on National Reading Group Day. And our next question is kind of related in a way, but a bit more up to date. So which other children's books have you really enjoyed recently?
That's a great.
Yeah, there's always so many that are going on. We were lucky. We've been doing some events with other people who have written kind of spy mystery stories. I'm sure some of the readers there have heard of James Ponti's books. He wrote a series called City Spies and has a new series with kid detectives. And again, that's the kind of thing that always interested me as a kid and still does, those kind of mystery adventure stories.
Yeah, I really loved the Sherlock Society by James Ponti. I loved Max and the House of Spies by Adam Gidwitz. And also I love books by Alan Gratz, author Alan Gratz, who writes historical novels. So I've loved those books recently.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Some really good recommendations there. And I think we've just got time for one last question, which brings us back to the Bletchley Riddle, which is around the character names. We've got School St. Paul's asking whether the names are taken from former codebreakers, and if not, how you selected the names Jakob and Lizzie.
I think we both just picked names, right, for our characters. It's actually, I don't know if any of you guys have tried to do this for a story, but I find it really hard to pick names. And mostly, as I've said, I've written nonfiction where that's not a problem because you're not allowed to change anything. But I don't know, Ruta, is it hard usually to pick names?
It is. And I always want to pick a name that is true to the time period. It has to be a name that when I'm researching that I have seen this name during the time period. And Lizzie was a name that came up again and again. And I thought it had such a nice spirit to it, and kind of encompassed, I don't want to give anything away about my rule breaker character, but it sort of encompassed her spirit. And so I chose it that way. And Elizabeth is also a name in my family. Many of my relatives are named Elizabeth. So.
And their last name, Novus, is a name from my family, and brought that in partially kind of as a nod to my grandmother's family, but also because she was a Jewish immigrant from Poland, who in this case came to the United States. But of course, many of those immigrants settled in Britain as well. And so that was a name that this family could certainly have had. And so we kind of wanted to honor that heritage.
Brilliant. We have absolutely rocketed through the time. So a huge, huge thank you to Steve and Ruta for sharing Jakob and Lizzie's story with us and for giving us such a fascinating insight into the real-life code-breaking events at Bletchley Park. Thank you too for everyone for joining us, and we hope you'll be part of our future exciting events. So do keep your eyes out for those. Thank you again, and happy National Reading Group Day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.